Was there an Adam? Was there an Eve? Or did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got what we needed when the sun shone down on the Garden of Eden.
Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia, Solartopia, Solartopia. Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia all over God's green world?
Well, we bit that apple and the garden was lost, and so we had to work to pay the cost. And so we went digging into the ground and started to burn many things we found. But
started to burn too many things we found. That's the great Dar Williams singing with Pete Seeger, the legend, and David Burns, who wrote the words to that song, except the one word Solartopia, which I wrote. I'm Harvey Sluggo Wasserman, back with you for another hour at Green Power and Wellness at the Progressive Radio Network. Thank you so much, crew in New York, for getting us together here. And we have a ton to cover. The world is really rocking. I am in Southern California. I'm about 20 miles from Malibu, and we're going to talk to Lance Simmons. Lance, are you with us?
I'm here.
All right, well, we're going to open up with you and talk about the wildfires there. You are a refugee, a longtime resident of Malibu, which I visit frequently. I'm going to talk about the destruction there and the fires in general. We're then going to go to Andrew Craig and Craig Unger to talk about the Mueller Report and what we expect. I want to anticipate the release of this thing, and I want to talk with these two great experts on what we think is going to be in there and how it's going to affect us. Andrew Craig, are you with us?
Yes.
And Craig Unger, are you with us?
I am.
Oh, God, you guys are, well, things are rolling. And then at the end of the show, the last 15 minutes or so, I want to talk with JON Simon. You guys are welcome to stay through the whole show on what's happening in Florida and Georgia. I am apparently the first one, or among the first, calling for new elections in both states. There is no way that we are going to get a reliable, meaningful outcome from the vote counts the way these two elections have been conducted. And I want to shout out to Stacey Abrams. Finally, a Democratic politician has refused to concede what's obviously a stolen election. If Al Gore had stood up in 2000, John Kerry in 2004, Hillary Clinton in 2016, maybe we'd have a reliable vote count. But in Florida and Georgia now, we are seeing unfold what happens when an election is stolen, or two elections simultaneously are stolen. And I want to talk about that at the end of the show with JON Simon, author of Code Red and an expert on this stuff. But let's start now with this action-packed hour with you, Lance Simmons. You are a refugee from Malibu. You have lived in Malibu a long, long time, and you saw the destruction firsthand. Do you know people who lost their homes and lives in this? There's 13,000 people on the roadside that says that that's how many people live in Malibu. It's probably as rich a city as there has ever been in the history of the earth, and yet people have lost their lives and their homes. And these are your neighbors, right?
Yeah, they are. And let me just say that I was one of the lucky ones whose apartment was not ravaged by this fire. But I know plenty of people who have lost their entire life's possessions and are currently homeless. And regardless of the wealth or how poor a community is, it is an absolutely devastating thing to one day have a home or a house or an apartment to walk into, and the next day to have it completely gone. So I'm not exactly sure of the extent of the damage. I don't think anybody actually is, but I've heard some horror stories over the past several days of entire neighborhoods being wiped out, and we just need to take stock of how expeditious and how effective our evacuation policies are and our evacuation plans. because it appears now the new normal is that we have year-round fire seasons in California, Northern California and Southern California. So my heart goes out to my neighbors who are struggling with this, and thank God the loss of life has not been as great down here in our neck of the woods as it has been up north. And I think our not just our thoughts and our prayers, but our help and assistance needs to go out to those people in Paradise in the northern part of the state as well.
Yes, well, and we need to point out, of course, I've been here in Southern California for over a year now. I think it's rained like once since I've been here. It's insane. And, of course, thanks to our brilliant president, we know that he's not our president. He's a guy in the White House. We know that global warming is a hoax. But the fact of the matter is, I got to say this, that the fires in Northern California, this is the second round of gargantuan fires. Thousands of buildings have been destroyed. Tens of thousands of people are homeless. And at least 50 people have died this time around. And I have to say that, and this is shown, that the majority of the fires in Northern California were caused by Pacific Gas and Electric, which cannot seem to maintain its power lines or its power poles, can't seem to clean the brush out from under the wires. I've seen reports now that indicate at least 17 of the fires in Northern California were caused by Pacific Gas and Electric. And these are the geniuses that are running the nuclear power plant at Diablo Canyon, the two reactors there, that, Lance, you and I could be completely wiped out, killed, irradiated, our families destroyed, everything, if something happens at Diablo Canyon. And it's being run by these people who caused these fires in Northern California. And my understanding now is that the air quality, I talked to a good friend of mine yesterday who lives in the East Bay, and that the air quality in the Bay Area now is absolutely it's incredibly unhealthy. People aren't wearing masks. This stuff is pouring down, and it's not just wood smoke, for God's sakes. These are homes that have asbestos and glass and all sorts of chemicals in them. Same as here in Southern California. We had a fire here. The air was terrible here in L.A., and even though they told us it was safe, and we know that one of the fires here started at Santa Susana, which is an old Rocketdyne site, which had tremendous chemicals there and radioactive material in the air.
Well, the EPA told us that and told the firefighters at the World Trade Center in the aftermath of the bombing that it was completely safe, and we've seen what has happened there. So I think we have to take all this with a grain of salt. And there's two things, Harvey, that really jump out at me here. And the first thing is, regardless of what the president says or what conservative climate change deniers say, we are witnessing before our very eyes in our lifetimes, we are witnessing increasing numbers of severe weather events and severe disasters. So we're seeing more Hurricane 4 and Hurricane 5 destruction. We're seeing more wildfires and more serious wildfires on a regular basis in places like California. To deny that, in fact, there is a connection to human-induced climate change is just foolish, and as long as we operate under an assumption which is completely fallacious, our public policies to deal with emergencies like this are going to be ineffective and short term for what is a long-term disaster that is facing humankind.
And I want to know also, Lance,
that's really important.
Yeah, and I want to jump in for a minute. Andrew and Craig, thanks for your patience. We'll get right to you in a second. But, where is our military? We're spending $1 trillion a year.
They're at the border.
Scattered all over the world.
Waiting for the invasion.
Protecting our border. Why wasn't the military airdropped in to Malibu and to Northern California to help people? We've got all these people on the government payroll. They're brave, powerful, healthy young people, strong-bodied, totally well-equipped. Why are we depending on volunteer and poorly paid fire departments when we have the world's best equipped military? Why weren't they called into these fires to help save people? It's outrageous to me.
Once again, our public policies are skewed by false assumptions, and the assumption that climate change is a hoax, I think, leads to a set of really inappropriate and misappropriation of dollars and an inappropriate reaction to real disasters.
Absolutely. Well, Lance, our hearts go out for you. We're glad to know that your home is preserved. I've been many times. If God ever made a place to watch sunset, it's Point Dume. And you drive in there, and there are all these beautiful homes. And I have not been back since the fires. I can't even begin to imagine. But I got to tell you,
those of us who live there have not been back for a while because we've been under mandatory evacuation, and we're not allowed back in. So, like I said, we will figure out the extent of the problem all too soon, and then we'll have to do what we always do, which is dig down deep and get ready for the next one.
Right. And I got to tell you, on Friday, I was at Santa Monica Beach, a few miles south of Malibu, and I have been going there for 50 years to watch sunset. Back in the hippie days, I used to hitchhike and I up and down Route 1, and I would sleep on that beach, and I was watching the sunset on Friday night, and I looked over to the right, to the north, and you could see the fires. And it was, it was like looking at the apocalypse. And then,
I know you need to get underway, but I just want to relay one quick thing. I wrote an article for the LA Progressive, which was published yesterday, calling this the new normal. And last week, I guess probably on Wednesday or Thursday, I can't remember which day now, I was riding my bicycle up from Santa Monica towards Malibu, and I was on the Strand, and I looked up, and there in the background was Malibu, basically with smoke billowing out of the mountains, and in front of that smoke, this is most ironic, was the flag, the American flag, flying on the stand at Will Rogers State Beach at half-mast. Now, it was at half-mast because of the killings in Thousand Oaks, but it was apocryphal, to say the least, that we were flying a flag at half-staff while Malibu was burning.
Right. And I had a piece about this at progressive.org if people want to see Lance's pieces at laprogressive.com. So you can stay with us, Lance. I know you're an old friend of Al Gore's, and got some words for him at the end about stolen elections. Let's move now. I wanted to have these two great experts, Andrew Craig and Craig Unger, to talk. I have a feeling that we may soon see the Mueller report. This much heralded, God knows what's in it, holy grail of reporting, and on the Donald Trump, the mobster in the White House. And you, Craig Unger, and then Andrew Craig will jump in, are the expert. You have a fantastic book called House of Putin, House of Trump, and we've talked before. Would you expect when we have? I think there's no way we don't see the Mueller report. No matter what they do, if this thing exists, if there is a report, eventually we're going to see it. Knowing Donald Trump's background, what do you think we might expect to see in the Mueller report, and what impact do you think it will have? And Andrew Craig, I'll let you answer after Craig. Craig Unger, please.
So you want me to go first?
Please.
Yes. Well, I do think the Trump will do everything he can to try to kill it.
Craig, you got to get closer to the mic. You're not loud.
I'm talking right into the microphone. Is this okay?
Okay, talk as loud as you can.
Yeah. I do think we will eventually see it, and whether it comes, we're in a very uncertain period here because we have a lame duck Congress. The Democrats have not taken over. The Republicans, Trump has put in Matt Whitaker, as acting Attorney General, who clearly wants to do everything he can possibly to squash the report. And we're sort of in an uncharted territory. It's likely, I think, that Mueller will release something before the Democrats come back to power in January. Whitaker is going to want to try to squash it, but he's going to have some of his hands tied to a large extent as well, because he will be operating under a Democratic Congress when the Democrats come back in January as well. And I think as for the material, we see that we will finally get into Trump's finances, and at least I hope, and I think Mueller is going in that direction. And we're going to see a lot about money laundering, and that includes Donald Trump's ties with the Russian mafia, which I write about a lot in my book, House of Trump, House of Putin.
So, I won't jump in now. Andrew, Craig, you want to add to this, please?
Yes. I think one way to look at what Mueller is likely to do is the report, and I know that was your question, but there's an additional tool that he can use, and that I think he would use in the interim, which is to continue indictments, because an indictment can lay out a very significant part of what he writes about, and it frames it in a more traditional way for a prosecutor, that somebody's accused of a crime and the details are laid out, and he can also farm it out, as he's done so far, to different offices. And that can potentially include cooperation with state authorities, such as New York State, that are not subject to Trump and his new lackey, Matthew Whitaker. And so if the special counsel continues putting out indictments, that kind of whets the appetite and sets the table for the larger report. And I think that the next round of indictments are rumored to be of Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi, and that will bring, if true, this whole focus more squarely into election activities, hacking, and money laundering, and Russia. I'm interested in what Craig has to say. I respect him. In fact, I'm looking right on my shelf on three of his books. I'm awaiting my copy of the latest one, but I'll let you run the interview, Harvey. But
well, yeah,
that's my thought.
Craig Unger, if you can speak up. Who do you? Andrew has raised the question of the likelihood of new indictments. Who would you expect to next be indicted?
Well, as Andrew suggested, Roger Stone's name has come up a lot, as has quite recently has Jerome Corsi. In addition, I mean, one big question is how close will Mueller get to the Trump family? And Donald Trump Jr. and Jared, of course, were both at the famous meeting in June 2016 at which various Russian figures attended. And that meeting has been seized upon as something that potentially really did represent collusion, because you had the Russians offering to turn over Hillary's emails to the Trump campaign.
Well, all right. So let's jump back to Andrew Craig. If Craig Unger has now raised the possibility that members of the Trump family would be indicted. So we got to jump back a minute. Can Mueller proceed to indict people without the approval of this new acting or allegedly acting Attorney General? It's
a great question,
Whitaker,
and it's one that I've been looking for clues, because normally the Justice Department has to approve indictments. But I've come across some language recently indicating that Mueller can indict people on his own as long as he keeps Whitaker and the main Justice Department informed. And he may well have already indicted some people under a sealed indictment. So there may already be indictments. And the only reason I did not mention family members is that I get the sense, as many do, that Mueller is proceeding in a almost, I use the word anaconda snake strangulation here, where he realizes that will set Donald Trump off immensely, so that leaving that almost next to last is probably his strategy. And to key, by the way, I covered the Paul Manafort trial, and so we kind of saw that process going forward, and then he basically stopped almost all activity for the last month and a half or so. I'm talking about Mueller team, because they didn't want to be accused of election interference. But now we're past that. And so I think this snake-like squeeze is going to go forward, and it will be assisted, I believe, by the tremendous criticism directed towards Trump and this acting attorney general. He could not have picked a more kind of repulsive, conflicted person to be his standard bearer than Matthew Whitaker.
Well,
so that gives
Andrew, let me just continue with you for a minute, and then we'll go back to Craig. If Mueller runs an indictment by Whitaker, Mueller wants to indict somebody, and he runs it by Whitaker, can Whitaker tell him no?
He may be able to, but what the Democratic victory in the House has done, and what Adam Schiff and others have done on the Democratic side, is they've made it clear that Whitaker could go to prison on obstruction of justice. And in fact, on the Justice Integrity Project site that I edit, our most current column ends with a picture of John Mitchell. And Mitchell went to federal prison on obstruction of justice charges. And for your younger listeners, Mitchell was the Attorney General. And he was an actual Attorney General and a real lawyer. And this is during the Watergate era. And he did not order Watergate. He didn't seem to know hardly anything about it, if you look at the situation. But he did try to help his president by covering it up. And he went to prison for that. And if Whitaker isn't aware of that or wasn't aware of that when he took the job, he's almost certainly aware of it now. And so he could be going to prison even quicker than Don Jr. He's got to know.
Wow. That is the first I've heard that. Craig Unger, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, Whitaker is just an extraordinarily comic figure, I think. And I mean, we saw it when Trump was saying first that he knew him well and he thought he was a wonderful person, and then Trump completely reversed field and said he didn't know him at all. Well, Murray Wass reported earlier this week, it was in Vox, that Trump had been on the phone regularly with Whitaker for months and months because he couldn't stand talking to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and that Whitaker became the go-to guy. And if you look into his past, the Washington Post has a very fascinating piece today that Whitaker was marketing time travel materials, stuff about he was trying to market getting in touch with Bigfoot, and then he was also trying to sell. His name was on a patent application, and I'm quoting from the Washington Post, for an extra deep masculine toilet for the well-endowed, specifying the size of average male genitalia. Whitaker's release said, this invention is designed for those of us who measure longer than that. So
wow.
This is the guy.
Craig, can you do me a favor? Can you call back in at 888-874-4888, and let's see if we can get you a little louder. I can hear you, and I'm sure the listeners can, but I'd like to see if we can get you louder. Can you do that?
Yeah, I'm yelling right into the receiver. I can barely hear you,
there must be maybe you're on a different line. If you can just call in on a different line, maybe we can get you louder. 888-874-4888.
4888. That's what I called.
Okay, if you just hang up and call back in, maybe we can get you on a better line.
Okay. Bye.
All right, thank you. Andrew, Craig, this idea that Whitaker could go to prison, I have not seen yet in the media at all, I have seen that he may be having second thoughts and may even recuse himself, which would really
here's
send Donald Trump into the stratosphere.
Sure. Pardon me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's kind of the value of your show here, because we're cutting through a few things. So, as Craig mentioned, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and some others have written stories about a half dozen or even more bizarre and troublesome parts of his appointment and his past. But if you take it together, it's not just a few oddball things. It's a wacko who is not going to be capable and has not been capable of making informed judgments. And he is in extreme danger, I'll say. One thing that Craig was trying to give your listeners the latest from today's Washington Post, but a couple days ago, there's a more maybe significant story, although it's all part of the pattern, that our new acting attorney general was a director of a scam company that was fined $26 million for ripping off consumers. And the directors, like Whitaker, were ordered to pay restitution, and he apparently has not. And furthermore, it's been reported that there's an FBI investigation of this scam. And just to paint the picture a little bit, since I'm relatively new on your show, but our Justice Integrity Project is on Pennsylvania Avenue, probably a baseball throw away from the headquarters of the Justice Department where Whitaker is. And across the street is the FBI headquarters. And across another street, also a baseball throw away, is the Federal Trade Commission, which has overlapping jurisdiction with the Justice Department. not to get too complicated, but here you have Whitaker at the Justice Department, and the FBI is apparently investigating him for running a scam, helping run a scam company. And it's a case brought in great detail by the Federal Trade Commission, which is 300 feet down the street. So this is like the Three Stooges or one of the Stooges being appointed a crooked stooge by Trump.
Well, Trump himself, of course, has had his so-called university completely ripped apart.
Well, exactly, but it's all coming home to roost now. And maybe I'll just add one other thing. I think many progressives are basically good-hearted and charitable and even angry, might look on a pet issue, whether it's wildfires, the environment, election fraud, and say that's horrible what they're doing. But in the back of the mind, thinking people are basically decent and so forth. Well, these people are immoral, and it all ties in together from my view here. And by the way, Harvey, I've got about 4 or 5 of the books on election fraud that you and your colleagues have done, as well as one that Craig has done. And it's all part of a piece. These are the worst possible people that anybody can imagine, and it all ties in together.
Yes, it does. Craig Unger, you back with it?
About Whitaker, if you guys can hear me now, that over the last few months, Whitaker has been sort of Trump's eyes and ears within the Justice Department overseeing the investigation. And in general, the White House is supposed to have a very, very distant relationship from the Justice Department. We're supposed to have separation of powers. But Whitaker seemed to have been violating that in talking to Trump. And in effect, he was auditioning to be the fox in the hen house on this investigation. And I think that's one of the things that's so disturbing about Whitaker, is he said again and again that this investigation is a witch hunt, that there's nothing there, and he's obviously prejudiced.
Well, now the question has arisen, and Andrew, Craig, I'll go back to you, and then I want to talk to Craig Unger again about the content here. The question that has arisen is, can this guy, Whitaker, serve as an acting attorney general without having been certified by the Congress? There have been no hearings to vet him.
Well, in any of these issues in Washington, you can always find somebody to be on the other side. And one way to measure it is who's speaking against their own apparent interests. And one indication of that is that George Conway, who is the husband of Kellyanne Conway, the counselor in Trump's White House, George Conway has written a very influential already op-ed he co-authored in the New York Times a week ago, in which he said that Whitaker's appointment is unconstitutional. And George Conway is a Yale Law School graduate, a partner in a big New York law firm, a Federalist Society stalwart, and was apparently very close to being appointed head of the Justice Department's Civil Division at the start of the Trump administration. And for him to say that, lay it out that this appointment has no legal validity is a stunning statement against interest, so to speak.
Well, so if he's not a legitimate head of the Justice Department, can Craig Unger again speak up, please? If this guy's not a legitimate head of the Justice Department, can Mueller just ignore him and he just go ahead and do what he wants to do?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I think yes. I mean, I think he's going to be held accountable by Congress, and if he's doing illegal acts, the Democrats will be controlling Congress the first week of January, and that does put him in jeopardy. So that's going to limit Whitaker's ability to really crush this investigation.
Unbelievable. All right, so let's get the content now. And I don't know, John Simon, have you called in?
Yeah, I'm here, Harvey.
Okay. Well, we're going to proceed with this for another 10 minutes, and then we'll get to elections. Here's the big question. Here's the $64 trillion question. What do we think is in the Mueller report? Do we think, Craig Unger has done the reporting along with David K. Johnston and Andrew Craig and others on Trump's mafia connections, his underworld connections, which, of course, extend to the Russians. What do we think, Andrew Craig, and then real quick, Craig Unger, is in this report?
Well, it would heavily focus, I believe, on money laundering. If it's an ultimate final report, there could be interim reports, but and we have very few indications because this has been a leak-proof investigation, unlike the Ken Starr investigation, where they were constantly leaking and never held to account. But you've hit it that it's a mafia enterprise that goes back decades. And I frankly, I hate to admit on radio that I would have trouble predicting how he's going to lay it out. But I will put in a caveat because these become very political documents. And so much as many of us would like to see the whole 30 years of corruption laid out by not just Trump, but these other people, his colleagues, including the Kushner family and Manafort, it may be that he has learned from the Starr report that you do not want to overreach and you want to keep it narrowly focused on demonstrable crimes that are within the mandate. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Craig for the prediction.
Well, Craig Unger, thank you for that, Andrew Craig. Craig Unger, you are the expert on the Trump mobocracy here. Do you think it's in the report, the Mueller report? Do you think he went there?
Well, I don't have any special intelligence on what Mueller is going to do. What I do think is, though, that when the Democrats get back in, you're going to see subpoenas flying right and left. You're going to see a lot of investigation about money laundering. I do think, as Andrew said, that Mueller's probably likely to focus more narrowly on actual crimes than give the big narrative. But I also think we'll be able to start to see the big picture. And one thing to keep in mind when we talk about the Russian mafia, and I think a lot of Americans always forget this, is that the Russian mafia is a state actor. I interviewed the head of the counterintelligence for the KGB, and I asked him about the mafia. He said, they were just they were part of the KGB. And when you put that together and realize that they were laundering money through Trump real estate, that they were living in Trump towers, that they were running operations out of there, and they are tied to Russian intelligence living in the home of the President of the United States, I think that's pretty deeply disturbing.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people, thanks to your reporting, Craig Unger, you're author of House of Putin, House of Trump. and Andrew Craig. What is your organization, Andrew?
The Justice Integrity Project, which was created 10 years ago to examine political prosecutions. In fact, that's how I first got to know Craig Unger, because he was doing very important work, solidified in his Boss Rove book, about how Karl Rove was using the Justice Department for political prosecutions. And if I could add one very quick thing out of that experience, it's much as more than half of the country wants to see, I think, Mueller succeed. We should also realize that the FBI and Justice Department do have a history of being political institutions. And so while I haven't found anything that he's done wrong as yet, I would just have a caveat that he was head of the FBI at a time that there were unjust actions by the Bush Justice Department. So we should keep a sense that even what we hope are the good guys didn't get to the top by being totally without political sense in a realistic and sometimes bad way.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Andrew Craig. Thank you so much, Craig Unger. I'm going to put in my 2 cents worth here. Having read Craig Unger's stuff and followed yours, Andrew Craig, there is so much illegality surrounding Donald Trump. This guy was born a criminal. I mean, his whole upbringing was in the shadow of the New York mob, because his father was a real estate developer, and you don't be a real estate developer in New York without working with the mob. And we know from Craig Unger and David K. Johnston's reporting that these ties run deep. I don't see how, in a report with this reach, we don't get to see that when it does come out, and I'm sure it will come out at some point. So let's keep, and I'll certainly have you guys back on to keep posted on this. But I wanted to get ahead of the curve, because I think that if there is a report, and I'm sure there must be, if there are indictments, and I think they will reach into the Trump family, right up to Don Jr., that we're going to see a lot of this come out, and it will be essentially a thermonuclear explosion. Thank you both, Andrew Craig and Craig Unger, and I do hope you'll join me again when we talk about this. Okay, when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, let's put it that way. Okay, thank you so much, and we're going to move now. We have Jon Simon with us. We're going to move now to Georgia and Florida, and I have taken the daring step. I'm sure I'm not the first or the only one, but I believe, having looked at stolen elections since 2004, when I watched up close and personal the theft of the 2004 presidential election in Ohio, I've taken the step of calling for new elections in Florida and South Carolina, and Florida and Georgia. And I want to take my hat off, and I think we all need to bow down to Stacey Abrams, the Democratic candidate for governor in Georgia, who would become the first black woman to be the governor of any state. She has done something that this generation of Democratic politicians has not had the courage or backbone to do. She has refused to concede. And as a result of that, we are seeing not one but two completely corrupted and completely unreliable elections. And any declaration of a winner for the governorship of Georgia or the governorship of Florida or the U.S. Senate seat in Florida at this point in time, based on that voting, would be completely arbitrary. And the only thing that I think can be done to guarantee any kind of reasonable outcome is to have redo these two elections. That sounds far out there, but listen, that's why we have this show. So we have Jonathan Simon with us, author of Code Red. Jonathan, let's real quick, we're going to be short on time, but let's have your take on what's going on in Florida and Georgia, and any factual updates you can give us will be greatly appreciated.
Okay, Harvey. Well, for one thing, I mean, I think the big picture here is that, the phrase that hard cases make bad law, and you can sort of translate that to, electoral shitstorms make bad reform.
You can't use language like that, then, John. You gotta.
No, I'm sorry. My apologies. Beep it out.
Okay.
But these kind of messes. Let's just call it a mess, turbulence, where everybody is straining for political advantage, and it's very much about who's going to win and which ballots get counted. Don't make a very good environment for reform, and yet paradoxically, they're about the only way that any attention really ever gets focused on this very, very dark corner, because our electoral system has been designed for concealment, and it is profoundly opaque and proprietary. So you have this paradox that we have all this, attention being put there, but, it's like they're getting inside the hot dog bun, but not really inside the hot dog. And let me give you an example of that. In Georgia, for instance, Stacey Abrams, who I share, tremendous admiration for her backbone, which has been so often absent among Democratic candidates when they've lost in suspect elections. She is talking about, making sure that every vote that was cast gets counted, or that everybody is allowed to vote. That the controversy over eligible votes
right. We have this
be
stripping
resolved.
In Florida as well, John.
I'm sorry?
Stripping in both, huge stripping of voter rolls in both Georgia and Florida, and that's one of the reasons I think that we have to have a do-over. Is that if these elections are
she's talking about the stripping part, and you and Bob had coined the strip and flip. So in the process of talking about the stripping part, what's being generally overlooked in terms of the national spotlight is the fact that the votes that were cast and were counted on paperless DREs in Georgia, that touchscreen computers. And the programming of these computers was basically overseen by Brian Kemp, directly or indirectly, so that the votes that actually were cast, we have no way of knowing whether that count is in any way accurate and honest and legitimate. So there are a lot of different components here, only some of which are capable of in any way being verified, and the others are not. And so you have a system that, it's basically like a pipe where there's duct tape over, obscuring a certain part of the pipe. That's where you expect the changes to take place. And to some extent that's true in Florida as well. And as you're seeing these recounts proceed, I mean, there's this tremendous jockeying for political advantage. I believe there are 10 lawsuits now in Florida. There's Rick Scott, the Republican Senate candidate, has raised an additional $1.5 million for the recount alone. This is a big, a huge flurry of activity, and it sort of harks back to what we saw in 2000 and to a lesser extent in 2004 in the presidential elections. But I don't know that redoing the elections is going to change our electoral system. And I think there are small prizes here and big prizes. Very small prize in a relative way of looking at it would be the governorship of Florida, the governorship of Georgia, the Senate seat. I mean, these are important. They have political implications. But from an electoral integrity standpoint, they're very small prizes. So rerunning the elections, different results,
Jonathan, let me jump in
that's not where I think we want to go. Where I think we want to go is proactively looking forward. How can we get laws and state constitutions, because this is largely a state issue, changed in time for the next election through ballot measures and direct, in other words, directly from the public, because the legislatures have shown that they have no interest in making our electoral system transparent. So how can we actually get the ground running and make these changes, whatever the results are on these two states now? Could they give us some momentum to move forward and make those changes so that our future elections, we don't have this kind of situation. And just one more point on that, and that is
wait, Jonathan,
are doing
hold on,
here.
Jonathan, hold on. I want to jump in here and say a couple things. First of all, these governorships in Georgia and Florida are extremely crucial because we're heading into the 2010 redistricting. And so both these governorships in two large states, Florida is the fourth largest state in the country, and Georgia is actually not that far behind. So the governorships in both these states will have a tremendous impact on the redistricting and the gerrymandering that will be coming up. And secondly, I think in a redo election, we can have a lot of investigation into exactly who gets the vote and how the votes are counted. These will be two of the most closely watched elections in the history of the United States. And I think a lot of change could come from that. We're going to run out of time, so I'm going to let you speak again. How do people get, you are Jonathan Simon, you are author of Code Red, and people get a hold of you how?
To www.codered2018.com is the website, and they can work it from there.
Now, you were going to make another point, so go ahead. But my point is...
I was just going to make a quick point that, one of the Republican strategies at this point, from Trump on down, is to make this about people, to make this about Brenda Snipes, to make this about corrupt election administrators and corrupt voters and whatnot. And, of course, that's a classic case of misdirection because, there are corrupt election administrators out there, and there may be corrupt voters. A tiny, tiny sprinkling. I mean, a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1% are that way. But the machines are ubiquitous. They're all over the place, these computers, and we're paying zero attention. Of course, Trump and the other, both major parties really don't want us to pay any attention to that, what's going on over there in that part of the room. And that is where 99.9% of the opportunity for electoral fraud comes from, and we've documented it in election after election. So we don't really want to sit quiet with this turning out to be about one corrupt administrator in Broward County or any place else. This is really systemic,
now, there's another question.
That's what really needs to come out of this.
There's another point here. If there was a redo in Florida, would the ex-felons who were enfranchised in the referendum and the regular election be allowed to vote? Now, that of course, would totally change the electoral dynamic in Florida, and certainly with another 1 million or 1.5 million ex-felons voting in a redone election, Andrew Gillum and Bill Nelson would be very, very likely to win. Your
idea of a redo is growing on me. And, of course, if this were Austria or some other country, real democracy, we would have had one out as a matter of course, because there is so much wrong with this whole process. I'm not quite sure how you get there, through the courts or whatnot. It would be, as you say, tremendously scrutinized, and that could only be a positive step. I mean, if we could get there, I'd be all for it. I just want to make sure we don't lose the opportunity going forward to change the rules of the game.
Yes, well, that would be, the rules of the game would change enormously in a, global scrutinized, we'd call in the United Nations to scrutinize redone elections in Georgia and Florida. It would be spectacular. And I want to say, again, Stacey Abrams, thank you so much for refusing to concede. I don't know if you're still with us, Lance Simmons, but your buddy Al Gore, I hope to God he gets the message that what he did in Florida 2000 was catastrophic. And, of course, the way the world turns, Brett Kavanaugh, who was instrumental in basically the fascist assault on people doing recounts in South Florida, is now on the Supreme Court. And that's what you get when you don't stand up. So this has been an amazing show. Lance Simmons, thank you so much for commenting, reporting for us from what happened in Malibu. Just awful. Craig Unger and Andrew Craig, you're reporting on the Mueller potential of the Mueller Report is spectacular. And John Simon, we are going to see what happens here. But I got to tell you, there's no way either of those elections in Florida or Georgia have yielded a reliable outcome. And I hope the idea of a redo grows on you and everybody else so we can actually have a reliable election. I want to also congratulate, by the way, Katie Porter here in California also did not concede her race for the U.S. Congress, and it now appears that she has won. And many of these California races are just now being decided, like Kristen Sinema in Arizona. And so, folks, Democrats, all you, and I want to say finally, this blue wave is a subset of a rainbow tsunami. And I've written about that at Reader Supported News. Take a look. And because this is a much, much bigger deal than Democrats getting a hold of the House of Representatives. This is a seismic shift. And we'll talk about it next week. Thank you, crew in New York. Thank you, Jonathan. We'll see you next week in Solartopia.
Either way, we got what we